Hello and welcome to episode 235 of the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. My name is Aidan Muir and I'm here with my co-host Torwen Eerkens, and today we are going to be talking about how accurate calories are on food labels, and we'll probably extend that to other components of food as well. I don't know if calories makes it a bit more clickbaity. I don't know. That's part of why I've gone with that. Anyway, moving on. So the reason I wanted to go down this route was I was actually editing a friend's book that they're going to release, and they just wanted to get another pair of eyes to ensure everything was accurate. And they made some claims in there about the accuracy of labels, and I think they used a very specific kind of number, and I just wanted to fact check that. And I started digging into that. I've obviously looked into this many times over the past years, but as I was digging into look at the accuracy, I was I think this would be good podcast content. So that's why we're here today.
So let's chat about calories or energy generally and how they are calculated on food labels. For most products, they are calculated using the Atwater system, which assigns average values to protein, fat and carbs, and then they're calculated depending on the ratio of these in a product. So actual varies can value depending on how a food is processed, its specific composition. Is the listed energy correct? Are the amount of ingredients actually the percentages in that specific product that you are consuming?
Yeah, and even on those Atwater factors, this is easily the smallest part of any discrepancies, but let's say protein, we call it an average of 4 calories per gram. We simplify down to that. It actually does depend on the amino acid profile. So theoretically, branched chain amino acids are closer to the 5 calorie per gram mark, which therefore by definition means that there must be other combinations of amino acids that are closer to the 3. Therefore, there is always going to be some level of discrepancy just based on that. Most of these companies are using software or spreadsheets. For example, they might be using FoodWorks as a tool that they use for that, and they just input the ingredients, nutritional profile and recipe amounts to make it all come out as this.
So it's definitely calculated rather than direct measurement.
It's possible to do direct measurement. So sometimes bigger companies will do it. Often it's when trying to verify a claim. So I don't know if this company has used it. I'm going to use this as an example because I believe they probably have. I don't know if I want to. Anyway, I'm going to do it anyway. I think for example, Rokeby with their protein smoothies, I would assume that they've tested it to have the 30 gram claim and everything like that, because they've used the hyperfiltration process to make it, and you can't just chuck hyperfiltered milk into software like this to come out with that 30 gram kind of number. And whether I'm wrong on that example, there are many cases when people have a specific claim that they will test it to ensure that it meets that claim.
Let's talk about labelling then, and what a label looks like on a product and what the labelling rules are in Australia versus other countries. So in Australia, it has been mandatory to provide nutrition labelling since 2002. We typically have pretty strict packaging rules in terms of really labelling allergens and putting the country of origin on there as well. But there is a bit of flexibility compared to other countries when we're looking at things in terms of labelling and calorie numbers.
This was the big one that came up when I was editing that book, where I've seen a lot of people on social media talk about the 20% guideline, where it could be 20% either side. And Australia doesn't have a law or anything on there. There are what are known as unofficial guides, which kind of talk about that in relation to calories, macros, and also meeting or exceeding vitamin and mineral claims, where with the vitamin and minerals, it's more about just making sure that you're not going far below those things. But this is where it gets out of my scope because I don't work in the regulation type of industry. But it seems like there's no actual cutoff point. But it is possible that if you were very far off, that you kind of do get a penalty for being quite far off as well. It's just hard to say where the line is.
And that's the thing. In terms of research in that area, in 2006, there was an Australian study released that looked at 350 samples across 70 products, and they did find a pretty significant discrepancy between actual products as well as, what the label said. So with that, we're talking negative 13% up to positive 61% for individual nutritional components, and that's massive.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that, once again, going with the editing of the book, I think the claim specifically that was made was that calories can be off by up to 25%. And the bit I was going at was, well, if we said off by up to, it kind of implies that none exceed that. There are plenty of cases that it does exceed that. The thing with that study that you mentioned is that there are some variables that can skew it. For example, because I was looking at all like micronutrients and stuff like that as well, there was a few examples that they listed where they said like, what if a product had like a tiny amount of sodium, but then the sodium was off by more than say 20% or like whatever. But even when you excluded that, actually when you included that, only 16% of the 70 products in the study fully complied with that 20% kind of leeway type of guideline. So if that was like introduced as law, only 16% of products would pass. If you excluded the numbers that were like a bit irrelevant, like the super small amounts of stuff, and it just doesn't really matter, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it only got a little bit better because in the 20% of products would comply.
Which is not a lot, especially if that was a strict rule in Australia. Not many products would be complying.
Do you have numbers for other countries? Because if we've got international listeners, I know we have. I've checked the stats.
I actually don't.
So I do have a few numbers where, because that's what I was curious on, because I've consumed a lot of content from other people internationally who've talked about numbers. So other countries do tend to have clearer guidelines, not all of them, right? But it does seem like a lot of them are technically not law, but they do have clear cutoffs. So like in Canada and also the European Union apparently have a 20% either side range that is listed in writing pretty clearly. Vitamins and minerals their range is minus 20% through to plus 50%. So once again, it's more on the just don't say you're like noticeably under. It's okay if you're a little bit over. And in America, apparently it says, like they say that calories and macros shouldn't exceed 120% of the declared value. So it's quite interesting that they're more lenient with going under than they are with going over. So I don't know. I think that is interesting, but yeah, you can see it is complicated, particularly when factoring in that it's kind of hard for products to comply with this.
Does it should it change then the way that we track, the way that you interpret labels, and the way that you choose products? This is the question that we then raise. What are your thoughts, Aidan?
So I have seen people use this as evidence for why we should not track at all, and almost as evidence as to why calories don't matter. I personally think that is silly. My own 2 cents. Take from that what you will. I think it's silly because I don't know if it's just because I'm not a perfectionist. I'm just okay with accepting that there is always going to be some level of discrepancy. You can do things that can kind of get a bit around this. Typically, the fewer ingredients in food, the more likely it is to be more accurate. You can also accept that some food ingredients are more likely to skew things than other. Like an example that I was reading through of this was they were talking about like if a product happened to contain meat in it, what if that meat had more water per 100 grams than another cut of that meat? Or what if that meat had slightly higher fat content or whatever? You could also use that with fruit where sometimes the same variation of fruit could have a tiny bit higher sugar or whatever. Like there are ways you can get around this to make this more accurate. But I would make this a really, really big argument for why we should focus on what happens in practice rather than what the specific calories say. I was saying a bit of as a joke off air to you, Torwen, I was saying like, it does frustrate me if somebody's like really like, no, I'm tracking exactly say 2,000 calories per day and my maintenance calories is exactly 2,500. I should be losing weight, but I'm not. And then kind of choosing not to change their calorie intake based on that, when we can never have that degree of confidence because of a few things. Like one, that's really relying on your ability to track very well, which could be true. But then even if you are tracking very well, there's going to be some level of discrepancy. So why not just adjust based on what happens in practice to account for this discrepancy?
This is something I talk about with my clients all the time. Like numbers are only a part of the picture. Like we look at what is happening and we can adjust based on that. I think it makes sense. Like I think for people who are trying to track more closely, whether that be athletes or clinical diets, take into consideration that there could be variance of 20%. Do we need to drop calories a little bit lower? Should you increase them a little bit more? That sort of thing. And like you say, if you're eating mostly a whole food diet, there will be less products with a greater variance. So it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, and I'm going to use a silly extreme example, but say you want to completely ignore calories. I'm just going to go extreme thought experiment here. If you go noticeably under like an appropriate calorie range, you're probably going to feel pretty terrible. You're probably going to be pretty hungry, fatigued, so on and so forth. You go noticeably over, your body weight is just going to go up over time, even if you're not like super stoked on, like even if you don't really care about calories, like most people probably don't want that beyond a certain point or anything like that. I think at minimum, just having like some level of awareness of this, even if you don't think about it too deeply, you don't focus on it too much or whatever, I think some level of awareness of calories and also awareness of these discrepancies existing as well is a good idea.
Thank you for tuning in. This is episode 235 of the Ideal Nutrition podcast. Oh, I know we say this most weeks, but we really do appreciate it when you leave us a positive review. So if you enjoy this episode, we'd love it if you could do just that. Thank you.